Menachot, meal, wine, and oil offerings are given, as well as the mitzvah to consecrate a portion of the dough, challah, to God when making bread. A man violates the Shabbat by gathering sticks and is put to death. God instructs to place fringes, tzitzit, on the four corners of our garments, so that we should remember to fulfill the mitzvot, the divine command.
Funny that.
Wasn't the man who gathered sticks the father of Zelophehad?
Yes.
The father of the girls who demanded the rights of land.
Yes, that's right.
Thought so.
That was another example. Oh, it's just frozen. 1 second. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, because my screen's frozen. My computer doesn't like Mondays. It works every other day of the week. Well, occasionally it doesn't like Sundays either. Okay.
Call it Bob Geldof.
I was trying to think of what it was, yes. Monday or something. I don't like Mondays.
Yeah. Right, here we go. Okay. Closed a few things. Right, okay. Let's try sharing our thing again. Here we go. So
it flashed on quickly.
Thank you, Iris, for that. I hope everyone caught that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couldn't read it quickly enough.
Right. Okay. I'll leave that there for a minute. Okay, so we've got the spies, we've got the wish to return to Egypt, we've got the meal offerings, we've got the break of Shabbos, Selachad, and we've got the Tzitzit, the third paragraph of Shema, which is how this week's Sedra ends. Okay.
Interesting to read.
Okay. Now.
From now on.
Okay. Just after Friday night, I realized just to mention to people that don't forget that everything you say is obviously public. So if you're having a conversation with somebody, mute yourself if you don't want anyone to hear. Now, obviously, if you're having a conversation with someone else, that doesn't work, but just keep in mind we can all hear. I'm not saying that I prefer anything in particular, just someone pointed out to me after Friday night, people on Zoom sometimes forget that everyone's on as well. Right, okay, so the spies, right? This is where we learn a minion from, by the way, you might recall. Whose idea was it to send the spies?
They asked to go.
Let's see. It was definitely grassroots. Sorry?
Moses sent them, but whether it's
right.
idea.
Well, they said they wanted to go. They said that they'd like to go because how did they know what was going to be there? So this would be a bit of a recce.
Right, which on the surface seems reasonable.
Yeah, but it was not the right reason. It was not. They didn't do it with humility for the sake of everybody. They did it for the sake of themselves.
Okay.
I thought it was the people asked Moses to send.
Yeah, they did, but not for the right reasons.
Okay. So, yeah, here's the beginning. I'm sorry, it's a bad translation. What it should say is, it shouldn't say God told Moses to send men. He should say, send for yourself. In other words, if this is something you want to do, then you can send men. So it's not me telling you to do this, right? That's source number 2. It's a bit unclear. Sorry, it's a bad translation. Shelach Lecha means send for yourself. Don't do it for me, do it for yourself. Right? Like Lech Lecha is go for yourself. So the beginning of the Sedra, God says to Moshe, send for yourself spies to go tour the land. Tour in Hebrew is like tour, to go on a reconnaissance mission. The land which I'm giving them Israel, one from each tribe. A prince from the tribe, by the way, they weren't nobodies, they were leaders of their tribes, which is rather worrying in itself. Whereas in Devarim later on in Deuteronomy, this is what Moshe has to say. He says to the people, who would like to read number 3 there?
I'll do that if you like, Rabbi.
Jeff, source number 3.
Yeah. Then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to reconnoiter the land for us and bring back word. I can't read something.
Hold on. No, it's not missing.
Well, can't get over me.
Yeah.
On the route we shall follow and the cities we shall come Must be two.
Must be two, yeah.
The pictures over the words.
Okay, yeah. So leaving a sorry. Okay, you have to move us somehow. So
Press the
leaving
minus
aside the
sign.
fact that it seems like an innocuous above the pictures, but then you won't see anyone, or you can just move it. I think, or maybe not.
You moved it.
Okay, in future, perhaps I'll make.
It depends where the words are.
Okay, so leaving aside the fact that it seems like an innocuous mission anyway, but besides for that, whose mission is it? Right? In this week's Sedra, Hashem seems saying to Moshe, here's something you might want to do. Here's a project for you if you want to do it. And then later on, he doesn't tell him not to do it. And then later on, Moshe says, you came to me and said, we want to send men ahead and bring back word on what we should do. And this whole incident, of course, was a disaster, like a number of historical events, like the Golden Calf. It basically deprived that generation of their entry into the Promised Land. It caused all kinds of things, cast a very long shadow into the future. Now, let's just look at that shadow for a minute. See what Rashi says. No, not Rashi, sorry, the Talmud. It says in this week's Sedra, Numbers 14:1. Who would like to read?
I'll read it. I'll read it. Right. The whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. And it is further written, and all.
So that's what the parsha says. One second. Yeah, so just that's the verse from this week's Sedra, okay? Oops, sorry. That the whole community broke into cries and the people wept that night about basically the punishment of the spies afterwards. So let's see, what is this night? Do carry on. Yes, it's further written.
And it is further written.
Mark?
Yes, I'm still here. And it's further written. And
sorry,
all
I thought we lost you.
Right, and it is further written. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. Rabbi, said the Rabbi Yochanan said, that night was the night of the 9th of Av. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, you wept needlessly that night, and I will therefore establish for you a true tragedy over which there will be weeping in future generations.
Okay.
If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something. It's a bit like when
parents say to their children, I'll give you something to cry about. Right. Now, all of this seems very difficult. Right, Moshe sends the spies, whoever's idea it was, the people's or God's or theirs or his. Right? It's like many things in life. If it goes well, no one complains. And if it goes wrong, everyone points the finger. They could have come back with brilliant reports and everyone would have been energized and believed, whatever. What happens? He asks them, are the people strong or weak? What's the land like? Are the cities open or fortified? Is the soil fertile? Bring back some fruit. They come back with a positive report. It's flowing with milk and honey, and here's the fruit. It's massive. Look at this. And then there's a big but. What's the but? The people who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified and large. We even saw giants there, right? Here. But, however, the people who inhabit the country are powerful. The cities are fortified and large. We saw Anakites there. Now, seemingly that's just their report. But of course, then we have the problem that demoralizes everybody, right? Now, presumably in any situation, look at society today, right? Look at COVID-19, look at Edwina Curry and the salmonella. On the surface of it, if there's a salmonella problem and, to give a briefing and say, we believe there may be a problem with salmonella in eggs is not a terrible thing to do if you're what was she at the time? The agriculture secretary or whatever she was. Was she agriculture secretary? No. Portfolio was. But of course it was disastrous. It destroyed the egg industry overnight. Right? If you're Gerald Ratner and you comment on the quality of your jewelry, it can have a similar effect. Could be an innocuous statement, but people pick up on it, right? And they notice it, and it becomes suddenly a whole, that's how spin works. And unfortunately, maybe it's a bit like we learned with Chil Hashem, that it doesn't matter what your intention is, it has the same outcome. Same thing here. if you're the spies, even if we don't, I mean, we're going to look at what the intention of the 10 spies was, because it doesn't make sense to say they were evil people. They were leaders, they were pious people. So why did they come back and say what they did? And of course, what happens then? You have Caleb and Yeshua, right? So let's see what happens next. After the spies come back and say how big everyone is and how scary they are. Sally, would you like to read?
Yep.
This is the aftermath.
Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, "Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack the people, for it is stronger than we." Thus they spread calumnies. What's the calumny?
Calumnies, lies.
All right, thank you. Among the Israelites about the land that they had scouted, saying, "The country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the Anakites, they are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, so we must have looked to them."
Right.
Calumnies are actually
Calumny
not
is
quite
the
light, but they're bad speaking.
They didn't tell the truth.
Yes, not quite.
So here's dictionary.com. The making of false and defamatory statements about someone to damage their reputation. Slander. Lashon hara, basically.
Yeah, slander, yeah.
Lashon hara can be true as well. Now,
Now,
look at the last... Look, I didn't know that. I thought it was related to the word calamity. That's interesting. Now, look at the last paragraph there. This is very crucial, and it's worded correctly. It is an accurate translation. I mention this many times. Every year this gets me. The Torah says very clearly, we saw the Nephilim, these giant people. And the exact phrase the Chumash uses is this, Vanahi ba'einenu kachagavim. We appeared like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And so we must have appeared to them. This is very deliberate wording here in the Chumash. We considered ourselves like schnips, insects, low, unworthy, and that's how we must have looked to them, right? Sally used to be a school teacher for many, many years. Pam was a nursery teacher, yeah? I don't know if it applies so much in nursery, but certainly in school. The most feared teachers are not always 6'4", 240-pound basketball players. It could be a quote-unquote little old lady who's got a sharp tongue. So it's how you project confidence, isn't it? Right? You know, self-defense, when you're walking alone at night, it's not all about, you know, whether you've got you're carrying a weapon. It's about whether you hold your head high with confidence in a way that says, I'm not afraid. So the first problem is that they saw themselves as grasshoppers. If that's how you see yourself, that's how others will see you. Right? Simple reality. Very basic piece of psychology there. Very profound. So first problem is they don't have self-esteem. Right? Why are they not saying we're the children of Israel?
They didn't have confidence in their ability or God's ability to make sure it would be okay.
But the psychological problem there is right, but maybe it's a lack of faith. But the psychological problem there is huge. What's the New Zealand rugby thing called? The haku, where they make lots of noise and beat them. What is it? The New Zealand rugby team do the haku. Is that what it's called? Haka. That's it. The haka. You know, it's all to psych up the opposition. You know, to scare them. You know, it could be that you don't think you're going to win, but if you act like a winner, it's like schools. They say, you know, you have to look, if you want to be an outstanding school for Ofsted, you have to look like one. There's certain things that make you look like an outstanding school. You can bluff. So we've got the opposite problem here. They say we think we're nothing. We're useless. So that's how we must have looked to them. Anyway, that's just one point. And what happens next? Usual thing, right? The Stockholm syndrome. It was better in Egypt. Why are we not back in Egypt? We had meat. Last week they were busy saying we had meat in Egypt. They forgot about the slavery. Yeah? Very topical, this. Slavery, right? So what's the next thing that happens? Right? They said to one another, let's head back to Egypt. They actually said, let's appoint a leader who can take us back to Egypt. Right? Such a defeatist attitude. Yeah?
Why is that,
this is the story. Why is what?
Why did the Jewish people
always...
Lost you.
there's a few answers to that. The first is the grass is always greener when you're not actually there, right? You know,
Didn't trust. They didn't have any trust. They were a bit fed up with, a bit
so-and-so.
like us with lockdown. Nothing's
Right.
happening that is positive.
Right.
I don't think so.
But you say that, but they had the giving of the Torah, they had their quails raining down.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, you know, until the spies, things were going well. But it's also human nature is to yearn for familiarity, even if it's, you know, why do people go back to their abusers, right? Why do prisoners want to go back to prison when they're released? Because it's familiarity. Familiarity, even where it's toxic familiarity. People are funny like that. People will go back to a toxic situation because it's what they know, or they don't know different. Remember, they've not entered the promised land yet. They've been traipsing through the desert with all kinds of challenges. They didn't do bris milah because of health and safety. So it wasn't an easy time traveling in the desert. Yeah, they got the Torah and so on. But on the other hand, I mean, the very fact that they didn't do bris milah, basically because of concern for not having time to heal, and pretty amazing. So, but this is their thing. They always want to go back to Egypt. They forget about what actually really happened in Egypt, right? Look, after the war, people came back to Poland and stuff, didn't they? You know, some pogroms took place in 1946, 1947. You know, you could say, how could you go back to such a place? But where it's also there's an element of we've got nowhere else to go. This is what we know. So it's a number of things. It's Stockholm syndrome. Anyway, let's have a look. What is going on here? Are we really supposed to believe that this was so misguided, that Moshe got it so wrong, that the people got it so wrong, that the spies got it so wrong, that, you know, what's going on here? How could they be so wrong? These are people that saw the plagues. These are people that saw the escape from Egypt, that saw the Egyptian army drown. These are people that saw that they managed to withstand the 7 nations around them. These are the people that had received the Torah. Right, and by the way,
why did they not get reminded of it? Why was that not echoed to them at this time? Remember what you lived through. Why didn't Moshe say, look, stop a minute, have a think back. Why did we leave? We left because you were so enslaved. Just because you haven't got food to eat, you moaned about that.
There's a new nation.
Right. It's like, and also, maybe there's a lesson there about the role of faith in military preparedness. That they bark at the wrong tree. It's not about whether we can defeat them militarily. You have to, of course, have a military plan and strategy, but you have to have your faith ultimately. Right? And ironically, they come back and say, this is the land the Lord promised us. So what are you afraid of? And now, from the other side, they weren't even right, because actually, as afraid of the spies may have been of the people in the land, let's see what the people in the land thought of the children of Israel. Next source is Joshua, right? This is the Haftarah, where Joshua sends spies, right? He's much more careful to Jericho. Kalev, and I can't remember who the other one was. Pinchas, I think. No? Pinchas? And they meet Rachav, right? The famous harlot, as she's usually described, who shelters them. And she tells them why she's sheltering them and what people are saying. So who would like to read? Who hasn't read yet?
I'll read it if you like. I know that the Lord has given this land to you. A great fear of you has fallen on us. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. When we heard of it, our hearts melted and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below.
Right, so this is what the people in Jericho are thinking about the children. The children of Israel are panicking that there's giants in Jericho. We're not going to be able to conquer. Jericho is the first place you come to, by the way. And meanwhile, in Joshua's time, it's the exact opposite. They're saying, we're afraid of you because we've heard about how the Lord goes to battle on your side. All right, let's have a look at another one. This is from the Song at the Sea. Iris, would you like to read again? I think we're back to you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, one of the Rainsburys didn't read.
We haven't.
Who read?
I'll do it.
Oh, sorry. Right, go ahead.
Pangs have seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Now are the chiefs of Edom dismayed. Trembling seizes the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them. Because of the greatness of your arm, they are still as a stone.
Right, so that was the song at the sea. The people of Jericho knew about it. How could the children of Israel forget? The people around them were afraid of them. How could they forget? And the spies were not nobodies, they were leaders. What is going on here? So
Rabbi,
what
can
is
I-
the real issue here?
Can I ask another question, Rabbi?
Sorry?
Ask another question.
Yes, except you break it up slightly. Go on.
Right. When the spies went, how long had the Jewish people been traveling out of Egypt? Would you know?
It's a couple of years. It's a couple of years, isn't it? I'm trying to think which year it is.
Because when the cloud was on, they stayed sometimes for a year, didn't they?
I don't know exactly, but it's a couple of years.
Only a
We've
couple.
had,
That's when it's decided they're going to wander for 40 years.
yeah, the 40 years comes after this. Yeah. That's a couple of years. I don't think if it's 2 years. It's
Short time.
a short time. It's not so long since they left Egypt, right? On the other hand, time can go very slowly depending what you're doing. Let's just have a look a minute, because this might be a clue. Right, we think that entering the promised land is great. Yeah, it's what everyone wants to do. There's another side to it. Right? What is their existence in the desert? Right? They don't have to farm. They don't have to do any agricultural stuff. Right? As much as they might have complained about the food, it's raining down from heaven. They have a well which produces water. Yeah, they have a cloud which miraculously protects them and directs them. They're basically, I mean, the obvious question is why they didn't do bris milah. And the only answer is probably because they were traveling. Because they're getting manna from heaven. Their whole life is based around the sanctuary, the Mishkan. It's very spiritual. And now they're going to have to enter the land. They're going to have to conquer it. They're going to have to create an economy. They're going to have to farm. They have to worry about droughts and water and weather and crops and all the other things that go with, living in the real world. So question, what will happen to their spirituality? What will happen to their closeness to God? We
What happened to their mental health? Because their whole existence had been turned upside down. So coping with nothing that you've been used to having a full-time occupation is quite a big step to take.
Right. There's even a clue in this that it says, one thing they say about the land is it devours its inhabitants. It devours those who settle there. What does that mean? So one explanation is it consumes you. Real life consumes you. By the way, you have this nowadays. I don't know, Sally, if any of your children would relate to this in terms of their aliyah, but why don't we all make aliyah? Some of us, maybe it's not top priority, but let's say you are a Zionist or
or your children live there.
I'm pausing because many people make aliyah who don't necessarily identify as Zionistic in the secular sense, but why don't people make aliyah? So people say it's not so simple, the economics. It can be difficult to make a living, it can be difficult to raise a family, it can be difficult. Often it comes down to economics. I knew people that made aliyah that came back here to do locum jobs as doctors, making more money in a month than they make in a year in Israel. So it's not a new problem. You're going to enter the promised land, let's all go live in Israel, great. And who's going to pay the bills? It's not so simple. It's something that holds some people back. Sometimes it's a valid concern, sometimes it's actually not. First of all, because you're not going to Israel because of money. You're going for more ideological reasons than that. Secondly, schooling. You don't have to pay private school fees in Israel. All kinds of things. No. But the point is, it is a concern. So it's not a new problem. It goes back to the time of the spies. We're going to go into the land and suddenly we're going to have to worry about real life. We're going to have to farm and we're going to have to, set up an economy. And we're not going to have this oasis in the desert that we currently enjoy. As Sally said, that's quite a big change to go through. It seems like a valid concern, actually. If the spies would have come back, instead of saying, so this is a suggestion, the spies weren't evil people. They had this wish to stay close to God, and they felt closer to God in the desert than they knew they would once real life hits them, once they've got to worry about everyday mundane life. So on the surface, if they would have just said that, they would have said, it's a beautiful land, there's delicious fruit. There are some big scary people there. I do believe we could conquer them, but I'm not sure we want to. Let's stay as we are. Let's just carry on because We live in this idyllic state, which they didn't say, right? They spun it. What's the fundamental mistake here? The fundamental mistake is this. Let's look at source number 10. This is from the Midrash Tanchuma on Parsha of Naso. It's probably referring to the Mishkan. Who would like to read? Who just read?
I haven't read yet.
No, sorry, Julian. Pam, would you like to read? Nice short one there.
Rav Samuel ben Nachman said, when the Holy One, blessed be he, created the world, he longed to have an abode below, just as he had on high.
Okay, this simple statement is actually so fundamental, at least to Kabbalistic thinking. You've probably come across it before. The phrase often is Dira B'Tachtonim, which means a dwelling place in the lowest of realms. So in the same way that we said Shavuos time, we talk about the angels and their closeness to God, and we say that's not what God wanted in this world. He wanted to have his presence felt in this low physical world. And the lower you get, the greater the concealment of spirituality. So in the temple, it was very revealed. But now, spread all over the world in exile, it's not nearly as revealed. But on the other hand, that means that the stakes are higher. That when we bring God into our everyday lives, we are giving him a more and more worldly, if you like, space. So it's all very nice having God on the mountaintop with the giving of the Torah, with thunder and lightning, and you don't have to worry about real life, and you don't have to go out to work. So you, I don't know, pray or study all day. That's great. What about when you do have to work, when you have to work the land, and you have to build an economy, and you have to put bread on the table? And with all of that, you manage to bring God into your life and bring God into this world. For example, by tithing your produce, or giving to charity, or keeping Shabbat, or keeping any of the many agricultural laws. So actually, that's the whole purpose of the Torah. The purpose of the Torah is not to live in a desert where you don't have to worry about where your next piece of bread is coming from. That's a lovely idyllic state. It's a bit like the Nazir. It works short term. For the people in the desert, they had the revelation of Sinai, but that's not God's long-term plan. It's like saying, why didn't we stay in the Garden of Eden? We didn't. We got booted out and we have to work the land. And from then on, we've worked the land. 6 days you shall toil, and the 7th day you should rest. So actually, the desert paradigm doesn't fit with anything else we've come across. It doesn't fit with life in Egypt, doesn't fit with entry into the promised land and agricultural needs. It doesn't fit with modern day life. It doesn't fit with how do you keep Shabbos in the desert? How do you work for 6 days? What do you do? What did they do? They didn't work. So as idea, it's not the ultimate goal of creation. So there's their mistake. They're saying to themselves, we don't want to go into the promised land because we're going to have to work. We're going to have to toil. I'm not saying that because of laziness. We're going to lose our connection to God. At the moment, we have the Mishkan, the sanctuary, all camp around it. And we basically live a spiritual life all day long. Don't have to worry. It says even their clothes got washed by the rains or whatever. We don't have to do anything, right? We live this idyllic lifestyle. The problem is that's not the ultimate purpose of creation. It was a stage. And maybe it comes back to the Nazir. There are times when you need to live that idyllic spiritual life and switch off from reality. To an extent, that's Shabbos or Shemitah, but it's not all the time. So if you reframe, I mean, at the end of the day, look, people died out in the desert and it was 40 years. So clearly it was a mistake. But if you reframe it from a sin to a miscalculation, a miscalculation is that they report back and then they're scared of success, that we may enter the promised land and we'll never go back to how it was, right? We'll never go back to the old days of spiritual bliss anymore, because we're going to have this whole situation where suddenly we have to live in real life, and we don't want that. We don't like that because that's not good for us, right? Says God. The problem with that is I do want to live amongst you, or in the Mishkan, or on Mount Sinai. I want to live. That's their mistake, basically. So, sorry, my phone's right here on my desk. Hi, I'm good. I'm just in the middle of a class. Who do you want to speak to? Yeah, 1 second. Just hold on 1 sec, folks. Roger's back in a sec.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Still, it's not a bad life then wandering around in the desert. Everything's
like being on lockdown, isn't it? Don't have to worry about anything.
the nomadic tribes that live in the desert.
Yeah, but it's not a bad
They've got an easy life to them.
No, but it's different, isn't it? Because they're out for survival, but this lot were, everything was provided for them, which in a way is not the best thing for people to have.
Yeah, but they
Hello.
don't
Right,
have
sorry
to
about that.
learn more. They don't have to strive to get on. They've got everything
Right.
that they actually need at that time. They
Yeah,
don't
but
realise
that's
what they're
psychologically
missing.
good for people.
They want to realise what they're missing.
So it's a bit like saying, I want to stay in yeshiva my whole life. I want to sit in shul all day and study. I'm not going to get married because that distracts me from my spiritual goals. Let me ask you a question. A lot of the stuff we learn about, we talked about recently about Kiddush Hashem, being a light to the nations. We talk about elevating the world around us. We've learned about all these things. How would you apply those in the desert? You wouldn't. What impact, when we talk about Tikkun Olam, if they would have simply all died out in the desert, I don't know, and not made it to promised land, what impact would they have had beyond the here and now? They would have had this spiritual connection to God. Would they have been a light to the nations? There were no nations. Any nations they met, they basically battled with. I mean, they didn't live amongst the nations. They didn't settle anywhere. They didn't lead any kind of life that would have been a beacon of light and morality. None of these things would have existed. So as much as we may talk about wandering the desert and getting the Torah in the desert, because the desert, there's good reasons for that. But long term, that's not the purpose of Torah or life. And this is the point. But a person could mistakenly think it is. Right? So take a scenario, guy, I don't know, a boy in his 20s who's been in yeshiva for, I don't know, let's say 7 years, and he's enjoying learning. And you say, maybe you want to get married and start a family. He says, no, it will distract me from my learning. At some point, you're going to say learning is great, but at some point, you've got to get with the program of real life. Now, it could be you go to Kollel after you finish, get married. It doesn't mean you stop learning completely. But the point is, looking like, we tell all our kids, you have to go to school, you have to get educated. That's why we don't send you down the mines anymore, because you are the future, etc., etc., etc. And when they get to a certain age, you say, yeah, enough education now. Now you've got to go into the real world. They say, no, I want to do another degree or whatever, right? Perpetual students. No, there are different stages in life. So it's the same with a nation. There's different stages. And if a person loves education, like a church, or they do long postgraduate work, and sometimes that's good. But for many people, it's not appropriate. Most people don't stay in yeshiva for 20, 30 years. Interestingly, most yeshiva...
Frozen.
Lost you again, Rabbi.
Oh, lost the rabbi.
Talk among yourselves.
Right.
Oh dear.
Oh.
Oh,
You back?
Action.
Yes.
Oh, Pam, you're the host now.
What?
No, we're not.
Pam is the host now.
No, you are.
Yeah,
But-
go on then. Over to you.
But Alice, how much did they charge you for farmer?
beg your pardon?
How much did they charge you to have that shawarma?
I think it was £10. The
No.
burgers are 12.
12 is a 12, I noticed. Yeah.
Burgers 12.
I think the next one's the 21st, is it? Oh, that is next
That
week.
is this Sunday.
I think it's the 5th after that.
I know it's this Sunday because Monday is my girl's mother's birthday.
Oh, right.
So I know it's definitely this Sunday.
Oh,
My,
right.
my mother's birthday.
It's also my friend in
Okay.
Israel's
19th.
eldest granddaughter's birthday.
Okay,
Hello, Rabbi.
back to the topic.
you're back.
Sorry, folks, we got knocked off there by my internet. I'm back. So yeah, we wouldn't be discussing the price of burgers if we're in a desert because they'd be falling out the sky. So
No washing up.
And to your student who's in his 20s, who's doing his third degree, or your yeshiva bocher who's been there perhaps a bit too long, you try not to. You don't want to kind of dampen their ardor, as it were. You don't want to say to them, you got to get into real life. It's very touching when somebody wants spirituality and somebody wants idealism, and it's great when you're in your teens or your 20s, and then you get to a point where real life kicks in. So the same thing for a nation. Straight after Mount Sinai, build the Mishkan, live in the desert, have this connection to God. That's great, but it ends at some point. And ironically, it ends with entry into the Promised Land. Although it's the Holy Land, it's very much going to be about working the land and economics and agriculture and reality. So one view is spies were not evil people who were trying to deliberately besmirch the land of Israel. They were the equivalent of the guy who doesn't want to get married or get a job or move out of the dorm because he wants to stay in Shiva. But the problem is he's 58 years old. So that's one view of the problem of spies. It's like someone wants to be very spiritual and they don't have a grip on reality. You don't want to take that away from them, but at the same time, you have to say to them, you need to put your feet firmly on the ground. So were the spies wrong in that sense? If that was their kavanah, it's not so much they were wrong, they were misguided. And being misguided, unfortunately, Moshe was also misguided when he struck the rock, right? And unfortunately, when you're leading, it makes a difference. There's a whole discussion, by the way. Anyone know the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he came out of the cave? Right, he went into a cave for, what was it, 12 years with his son? Let's go back to the sources here. 1 second. Hopefully it will work. Oh, come on. Still thinking. Right, is the source back on screen?
No, it's not.
The one that Pam read.
Yeah, that's Sarah.
Oh, okay.
Can everyone see that? Oh. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's source 10.
Yeah.
We've had
No.
that one.
Which is what Sally read.
No, Pam read.
Oh, Pam read, sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and this
Feel
one
like
is
I've lost everyone.
this one is doubled up.
Yeah, this one's impossible to read.
Just stick your thumb up if you can hear me. No?
We can hear you, but we can't see the source clearly. Emerged from the cave and saw people who were blowing and sewing. Rabbi Shimon
Got that.
Yochai said, "These people abandon the eternal." Well, I can read it.
Oh, we haven't got that. We've only got the source 10 up.
I've got, I assume it's source 11.
All right.
Rabbi, this source is not possible to read.
Oh. Right.
No, we've lost the source entirely.
He's talking, we can't hear him.
That's
It's
because
on.
it had an overlay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That-
Yeah.
No, we can hear
Yes, we
you.
can hear you.
We got source
Right.
7 now.
It's going mad. It just told me that it muted everybody. And oh, okay. Right. We've got a bad connection today. Okay. Can you see that source, number 11?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Who would like to read? This is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Went into a cave for 12 years, basically.
The Meron. He lived in Meron.
Meron. That's right. It says that it's a very interesting question. It says if you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from other mitzvahs. So the classic example you may be aware of is an onen, somebody who, God forbid, has a bereavement, doesn't put on tefillin or daven until the levaya. Why? Because they are osek b'mitzvah. They're involved in the very precious mitzvah of chevra kadisha. So question, if you're studying Torah all day, do you have to daven? If you're visiting the sick, do you have to daven? Right? If you're involved in chevra kadisha work, if you're spending hours doing a tahara, do you have to daven? So there is a concept of someone who literally their whole day is learning Torah. And such a person technically maybe will be exempt from prayer because they're studying all day. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they say, was such a person. He went into this cave. I don't know what he did for food and drink. And bathroom facilities, but he basically lived a spiritual life. Right? And remember, he wrote the Zohar, so he's a very Kabbalistic person. So there's a problem though when he comes out of the cave with his son. Let's see what the problem is. Right. Who was reading? Sally, was that you? I think?
I'll read, yeah. They emerged from the cave and saw people who were ploughing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, these people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance. The Gemara relates that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, directed their eyes was immediately burdened. The divine voice emerged and said to them, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave. They again went and sat there for 12 months. They said, the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna lasts for 12 months. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. A divine voice emerged and said to them, emerge from your cave. They emerged everywhere that Rabbi Elazar would strike. Rabbi Shimon would heal. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, my son, you and I suffice for the entire world, as the two of us are engaged in the proper study of the Torah.
So here's the maturity of the father over the son, right? So let's just summarize what happened here. They spent 13 years in the cave. They come out, right? They've been studying and complete, in this bubble, like the guy sitting in Shiva for 13 years. They come out, they look around, they see people doing ordinary things. They go, well, what are you doing? You've got God's, spiritual life and you're busy planting things and sowing seeds, and what's wrong with you? And they start staring at people and they literally burn people up with their eyes. And God says, I didn't let you out of your cave, of your bubble of study to destroy my world. Go back for 12 months, which is very symbolic because the judgment of the wicked in hell is 12 months, right? And then they're cleansed and then they come out. It's interesting. Rabbi Shimon's got the point. His son hasn't. His son's still causing havoc with his daggers. He's looking at everyone. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, I'll heal people. Because Rabbi Shimon says, you know what, the two of us, it's sufficient that we're studying Torah. So maybe for two people like that, it makes sense. Ben Gurion was secular. Ben Gurion understood that a Jewish state needs people sitting in yeshiva, right? The whole idea of the exemption from the army was Ben Gurion's idea. Why? Because he understood in the same way that in secular society you need researchers and people, postgraduates and people in academia, but not the whole population. So Rabbi Shimon says, you know what, you and I, we will occupy ourselves with holy matters, but the rest of the world has to carry on. So the Gemara discusses this question that comes out of this. Is real life compatible with spirituality? Right? Can I be plowing and sowing and seeding and planting and harvesting and all my kibbutz stuff or moshav stuff, as it were, or for that matter, trading and transacting and getting on with my life and my business and worrying about paying the bills and still be spiritual? In the Gemara, there is a view that says no. And according to that, you would have to go live a hermit-like existence in a cave. But that's rejected by most people. They say, no, the point of Judaism is to live in this world. And the proof is most mitzvahs in the Torah involve things like agriculture or commerce, right? Mitzvahs that involve objects, mitzvahs that involve how honesty in business. If the goal of the Torah is to go live on a mountain and not, or in a cave and not interact with anyone, you don't need 613 mitzvot, the majority of which deal with things like, looking after people's animals or agricultural mitzvahs or interpersonal mitzvahs. So the Gemara basically rejects that. Let's see what Pirkei Avot says. Last week's Perek, for those that read it Shabbos afternoon.
Oh, you can. It's important to earn a living as well as.
Right. Yeah. Let's have a look. Who would like to read the last one? I think it's the last one.
Shall I go back to me? Is it?
Oh, we've got one more. Yeah. Go on, Iris. Off you go.
Rabban Gamaliel, the son of Rabbi Judah Hanassi, said, excellent is the study of the Torah when combined with a worldly occupation, for toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. But study of the Torah, which is not combined with a worldly occupation, in the end comes to be neglected and becomes a cause of sin.
Right, very clear there. Or, like Rabbi Shimon, it becomes too idealized and therefore you can't cope with the real world. So you either neglect your Torah. It's interesting what that mission is saying. It seems to be saying you have to apply your Torah in some way. Makes sense, because a lot of what we learn is applied Torah. You're going to go study the Talmud all day, all about agricultural laws and interpersonal laws and marital laws. And in the same way, there's no point studying the kashrut laws and not eating food, obviously, right? They affect the food we eat. There's no point studying the laws of Shabbos and not keeping Shabbos. So what's the point of studying all the laws of agriculture and business and interpersonal contact and relationships and Lashon Hara if you live on a mountain or a cave and you never see anyone and you don't do business with anyone? You're going to neglect your Torah. You're not going to apply it. right? Or alternatively, like you said, Rabbi Shimon said it was a sin that they had to do penance for 12 months, that when they came out of the cave initially, they were too spiritual. So we see the problem. We don't want to discourage people from being spiritual and idealistic, but it has a place. It's like the Nazir, it has a place. But if we look, most of the time we find that's not what the Torah demands. The Torah demands living in this world. Right? It comes back to the 6 days work and the Shabbos as well.
You spoke
Interesting
Rabbi,
comment from yeah.
but it's a funny story. I had an uncle, and I'm not sure if he was that religious, but he married my aunt. My aunt married him, but he was quite wealthy, so he went to university, got his degrees, but he kept taking degree after degree after degree. And then my aunt got fed up with him because she said it's time he got a job, but he wouldn't go back to work. So she divorced him.
Right.
Right, but all he wanted to do was study. You know, he had enough money to. It's an interesting story, but you know, but my aunt, although she divorced him, although my aunt divorced him, she went round to his house every week to give him food and make sure he was okay, though. It's an interesting story. Yeah.
Sorry, I put the wrong quote from this, actually. This is a quote from Maimonides. So what I meant to put was a quote where he says that there is a paradigm where a person would basically live on their own and have no influences around them and have no influences on them. But he says that's very much the exception, right? Life doesn't work that way. You need community, as we know. So he says here, then he goes on to talk about peer pressure. He says it's a natural tendency of man to be influenced in his ideas and conduct by his fellows and associates, and to follow the usage of the people of his state, right? Peer pressure. Because of that, it's necessary to be in the company of the righteous, to sit near the wise, to learn from their conduct and distance oneself from the evildoers who follow the path of darkness, so that we don't learn from them. As Solomon said, he that walks with wise men shall be wise. The companion of fools shall smart for it. Unfortunate translation there. Interesting word, of course. Smart there meaning to hurt rather than to be smart. Right? Interesting word there. Like cleave, to cling or to break apart. Or like we said with kadosh, to be holy or to be extremely base. So, another point about the spies, right? It talks about, we know in the Parsha, about the spies as a congregation. That's why we learn the congregation of 10, the minyan from, because they were a congregation of 10. So, people congregate for different reasons. They congregate for good and they congregate for bad. Anyone who's ever dealt with, you see a large group of teenagers or young men primarily, although these days young women as well, especially if they're drunk, it's quite intimidating, right? Large groups can mean good things and bad things, right? And we have large groups, things get out of hand. Peer pressure. So one of the problems with the spies is that they seem to have fed off each other. They may have had some inner kavanah, which was more noble. But unfortunately, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with the real world. What happened in the real world is they demoralized the people. The people said, we want to go back to Egypt. And the whole point was lost. The point was, we do want to enter the land of Israel. We do want to build a society there with all the challenges. If you would have said to the Chalutzim, you're going to go into the land of Israel, it's a desert, you're going to have to plant and you're going to have to work hard and you're going to have enemies and you're going to have wars. They say, forget it, we'll just stay here in Eastern Europe. They didn't, right? People had an ideology. Imagine if they would have said, we were better off in the camps. People said, that's ridiculous. And that's what people said, we're better off in Egypt. Doesn't take much for people to be despondent. And that's the problem with the spies. They may have had they may even have noble spiritual goals, but it doesn't really help because ultimately that's not the goal. The goal is summed up in Devarim here. It's as we said from the Zohar. It says, keep the mitzvot. They should be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other nations. When they hear of these laws, they'll say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. That's not going to happen in the desert or on the mountain or in a cave. That happens when you live in the real world. Amongst people. It's interesting. When we learned about Chilul Hashem, there was one view, I think it was, I don't remember who it was, who said that the very fact that we live outside of Israel is daily proof that we disobeyed God and he had to exile us. On the other hand, Torah says quite clearly that part of our purpose is to be a light to the nations. That people look at us and say, look at these wise people. Look at these discerning people. Look what they've built. Right? You can say that in Israel today for all the criticism. Look what they built, this oasis in the desert. They made the desert bloom. It's amazing that in a neighborhood where clan warfare and democracy are very common, tit for tat killings and honor killings and centuries old feuds and violence against women for that matter is very common. And to have a democracy with Western values is unbelievable. So this is the purpose of life. This is how do we make a dwelling place for God in our day-to-day lives? Yes, you have to go into the land of Israel, not to build the temple. Yes, you have to do that. But yeah, you have to farm the land. You have to work the land. You have to build an economy. You have to worry about money and paying the bills and all these things. That's all part of God's plan by living the real world. Right? God said he didn't want angels that would keep the Torah up on high. He wanted people that would bring the Torah into the lowest levels. The lowest levels means, ironically, going into the land of Israel, because although it's a holy land, but going into it and elevating our everyday stuff. And the spies totally missed the point of that. The result was disaster. So whichever way you look at it, whether their intentions were noble or not, unfortunately, they missed the point. It's like Moshe striking the rock. It's like Aaron's sons when they died. Having the wrong intentions can sometimes be quite a disaster, right? Particularly if you're in a position of leadership and you demoralize the people. And that's basically what it comes down to. That this is what we want to hear people say. And they'll only do that when we live amongst them and we live in the real world. So that's the purpose of Torah. So you're going to say, but they wandered in the desert. Okay, so when the Torah was given in the desert, they want to... The same way we say that before the giving, more bringing...
Breaking up.
God into everyday things. Oh, hello. So also with the land of Israel, entering the land of Israel symbolizes the next stage of their growth, putting down roots, building an economy, farming, agriculture, getting to grips with the land, quite literally, getting, can't think of the word, nitty gritty, can't think of the word, but anyway, but that's what God wants from us. When he said, you will enter the land, that's what he meant. Staying in the desert isn't the answer, right? Staying in school for the rest of your life isn't the answer. Staying in your shiv or university isn't necessarily the answer, right? Staying in your bubble isn't the answer. Mm-hmm. It's attractive, right? Let's all stay children, Peter Pan. Doesn't work that way. In the same way that we as people mature, and it doesn't make sense for a 28-year-old to still be in high school. There's something wrong there. Similarly in the desert also. In the beginning, fine. Have your moment, build your mishkan, enjoy a few years of idyllic life, but at some point it has to come to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's where the spies went. Misunderstood the whole point of life. Right. Any questions?
In the book that I've been using,